2 days ago, the Wall Street Journal published an article where senior law enforcement officials and intelligence community officials declared that Chinese espionage was the single most significant long-term strategic threat facing the United States. And they aren't just labeling the economic threat that we hear so much about on the news. They are talking about China. They have a goal. They know where they want to be in the world, and they know what will make them safer as a world power. And they are using their plans to execute and to get to that end goal. So with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Maorong Jiang. He is an associate professor of political science and international relations and director of the Asian World Center here at Creighton University. After Dr. Jiang's graduate studies at the Beijing Foreign Affairs College, he taught international relations as a regular faculty member at the Military College of International Relations in China. He remained an active duty PLA officer from 1979 until 1989, when he was transferred to the Ministry of Personnel, now called the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security. That was in the central government in Beijing. In 1990, Dr. Jiang was selected by the U.S. State Department to participate in its prestigious International Visitors and Leadership Program. Dr. Jiang was a visiting fellow for 3 years at the University of Hawaii, during which he participated in the East-West Center's Asian Pacific Leadership Program. Since coming to the United States for his doctoral studies in 1996, Dr. Jiang's counsel has been sought by several government agencies interested in engagement with both China and North Korea. Dr. Jiang was a regular speaker at the Global Reporting Network and at the Honolulu Security Seminars in Hawaii. Dr. Jiang has also served on the U.S. Strategic Command Deterrence and Assurance Academic Alliance since 2015, and from 2014 to 2016, Dr. Jiang was one of the key individuals in the Japanese Foundation Outreach Initiative projects at Creighton University. He was also selected by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan to participate in its building of a multi-layered network of influential figures. Since 2018, Dr. Jiang has been involved with the strategic outcomes in the Korean Peninsula project and the future of global competition and conflict projects that are prepared for the strategic multi-layer assessment under the supervision of the Joint Staff and Department of Defense. His research on a flexible framework to achieve strategic objectives and U.S.-China policy will be included as a white paper on China as part of that strategic assessment. He has numerous publications that are mainly on security issues focused on U.S.-China, U.S.-North Korea relations, and I would like to welcome Dr. Maorong Jiang from Creighton University.
Good morning. Thank you, Colonel Ivan. And thank you very much for coming to the talk that I've been preparing for quite some time during the course of my class on politics of Asia at Creighton. I've been seeing a lot of lectures through the internet on the same subject, and I decide that I may talk something which might be different from a lot of talks by the academia and think tanks throughout the country. And also I've been following what's going on inside China regarding the U.S.-China relations. Through my preparation, I realized there are some important points that have not yet mentioned throughout the talks by a lot of institutions. For instance, the liberal world order. For instance, the China's ambition in building a new style superpower relations with the United States. With that in mind, I'm going to start on my research on the liberal international order that some people is afraid that China is going to alter or modify the order. Great Britain's 1815 version of the liberal international order aimed to protect the freedom of navigation and free trade. A united Germany broke this order with its mercantilist trade policy that challenged Great Britain and drove the world on the path to the First World War in 1914. A defeated Germany came back with Hitler's new challenge to the League of Nations that then took the world into the Second World War in 1939. The global liberal international order has remained largely functional for the past 74 years, despite the interruption of the two world wars. Today, however, the balance of power is shifting, new challenges are emerging, and there are new incentives to keep the liberal international order in place. The US is credited with bringing China out from its 30 years of isolation after the two countries established diplomatic relations in 1979. The US rapprochement with China 40 years ago this year eased hostility towards China by old and new foes alike within the international community, and eventually resulted in an economic opening in China. The fact is that the China of today will not be a reality if it hadn't been for the US securing the liberal world order and promoting a free market economy. It is true that China is economically developed today and will be militarily strong tomorrow. However, Chinese politicians, CEOs, and military officials know that China would not have been benefited from the liberal world order without US engagement. Engagement that directly helped China to overcome its broken economy and dystopian society, the result of decades of domestic turmoil and international isolation under Mao Zedong. China is different today. However, it has a long way to go to achieve its goal of becoming a truly prosperous country. China is not wrong or overly humble in its claim to still be a developing country by WTO status. While its developing country status allows China to take on far fewer commitments than developed nations, it does share the economic burden of many poor countries, some of which China has maintained with its political alliance since the 1950s. The question of how long China remains committed to its third world allies is still open among policymaking circles. China is unchanged in terms of its political and bureaucratic systems. China remains an autocratic party state under one man and a union between technocracy and the elites. The relationship between the party state and the masses, the majority is Han, is one in which society continues to live in the shadow of a thousands of year-long dynastic order. It is a pyramid-shaped society with one man at the top. Democratic institutions are strongly desired by the liberal-minded academic and financial sectors, as well as law enforcement agencies. However, China's contention is that the one-party rule state has not only survived the heyday of democratization, but can be credited with effective and determined leadership that has persevered in order to achieve its economic goals, while simultaneously lifting millions of its citizens out of poverty. Yet we know this comes at a steep price in terms of the suppression of human rights, limited or controlled religious practices, and the deprivation of individual political freedom. It is obvious that China has plenty of domestic matters that undermine its legitimacy and authenticity as a nation state. It also has plenty of external issues that puts its reputation at stake as a rising power, with impressive economic achievements, practical military build-up, and public ambitions for global infrastructure projects through its Belt and Road initiatives. If we look into the domestic affronts of which China is accused, the list includes its infamous authoritarian nature as one-party country, its dishonorable lack of decent human rights records, and its newly established but shameful re-education center to round up Muslims in Xinjiang. Inside versus outside China, these matters are judged by completely different standards. However, despite internal discontent, there is virtually no chance that unrest will lead to a revolution, turning rule by man to rule by law. It is an unfortunate fact that the rule by man in China today is a continuation of a centuries-long absence of popular desire for law-abiding society. All internal unrest in modern Chinese history ends in a bloodbath. The Chinese culture of realism fosters realpolitik based on practice and material factors rather than on moral and ethical objectives, and undermines the potential for revolutionary change. China is now facing new troubles dealing with external issues since it has developed and fostered its reputation as a global economic power. These new troubles are increasingly intertwined with China's domestic issues. The most notable problem lies in China's newly obtained economic might. One of the most popular issues of debate is about whether or not China's rising status will alter the liberal international order, further challenging the existing world powers and the United States in particular. The thinking goes that China, unlike many other countries following the rules of international cooperation, rejects the established rules, inserts its political influence through its economic power, and attempts to dominate areas traditionally in the sphere of U.S. influence. Unacceptable belief about China's rise prevails, backed by a simple historical analogy that there are some striking similarities between British-German relations in the later 19th century and the United States-China relations today. If so, just like the British-German relations of the past, current US-China relations are likely nothing but a zero-sum game. Recalling the recent anti-China campaign rhetoric, depicting China as responsible for the greatest single theft in the history of the United States, it is easy to conclude that the U.S. opening to China was a fatal mistake, and that it is disastrous that the U.S. attempted to integrate China into the liberal world order. Given this rhetoric, it is unbelievable that China, after committing rape against the United States and exploiting the global international system, has instead sought to insulate itself from the changes that a free market economy could bring. To many Americans, it is absolutely unacceptable that China might wish to alter or modify the liberal world order, and in so doing, displace the United States as the world's superpower. Therefore, the U.S. must take strategic steps to prevent China's rise to world domination. Question rises herewith, Do China's technological advances and its economic might empower its desire and capability to change the liberal world order and turn the trade from a positive-sum game to a zero-sum game? More imperatively, does China wish to become a global hegemon? Let me share with you my study, first on the recent move of the Chinese leader Xi Jinping and the Communist Party under him, as well as the governmental plan for China's domestic agenda for the next years, a few years. Usually goes to 5 years. I will then give you a peek into Xi's ambition and China's endeavor in the international arena. I will follow China's pyramid-shaped societal structure with the focus on the rule of man, in this case, the rule of Xi, the party under his leadership, the state apparatus run by mostly party members, and the masses of people obedient to the party line. If we don't understand how Chinese society functions, or if we use our own perspective about governmental institutions based on democratic principles and a moral and ethical foundation, it is likely that we will get China wrong. On the other side, the Chinese, based on their limited or constrained understanding of how the American democratic system and institutional functions, following the rule of law, have little understanding of the United States. Despite this fact, many Chinese people, especially politicians, CEOs, and the poor across the country, yearn to live, to visit, even work in the United States. Regarding China's domestic agenda, the New York Times reported on March 11, 2018, in an article titled, "China's legislature blesses Xi's indefinite rule." It was 2,958 to 2. Includes the following words: President Xi Jinping said China on course to follow his hardline authoritarian rule far into the future, when the national legislature lifted the presidential term limit and gave constitutional backing to expanding the reach of the Communist Party. Under the Red Star Dome of the Great Wall of the People in Beijing, nearly 3,000 delegates of the National People's Congress, the party-controlled legislature, voted almost unanimously to approve an amendment to the Constitution to abolish the term limit on the presidency, opening the way for Xi to rule indefinitely. Upon hearing this news, President Trump praised Xi for extending his own tenure for life, saying, quote, "He is now president of life, president for life, and he's great," end quote. Mr. Trump's positive endorsement of Xi was unexpected, and it matters for China. The New York Times quoted a Chinese scholar as saying, quote, "Chinese leaders care very little whether Trump is seen negatively outside China," unquote. However, quote, "the U.S. still represents the reference point for China," end quote. Trump's celebration of Xi's bid to shepherd China back into an era of one-man dictatorship was a sensitive issue inside China. Trump's suggestion, albeit as a joke, that the U.S. might one day, quote, "give that a shot," unquote, bears a long-lasting consequences. All this is a watershed moment in modern Chinese history. I will not take time to go deeper into the positive or negative aspects of Xi's power extension through the amendment of the Chinese Constitution. However, it should be noted that Trump's endorsement presents an unprecedented opportunity for closer US-China relations. And I would like to sometimes thinking about an ethical question with Trump's endorsement of Xi that actually it does good things. Head of state diplomacy is tremendously important and influential in China. Trump skillfully made a friend out of Xi, with whom it is vital to maintain a good relationship if positive relations between US and China are to continue. The relationship between the two men represents the two most powerful nations, reassuring the world that there is global order and regional security. The timing is perfect to make the statement that US and China share mutual responsibility for maintaining the global order. What do I mean by saying the timing is perfect? Trump's MAGA is inspirational. However, the US leaving the Paris Climate Accord, UNESCO, UN Arms Trade Treaty, UNHRC, the Human Rights Council, INF, and passing a bill to even leaving the United Nations provides China with an unbeatable opportunity to move to the global stage. Furthermore, Trump's EU and NATO attitude is pushing US traditional allies into the arms of the Chinese. And smart Chinese came to the realization, not illusion, that the US is withdrawing from global leadership, if not domination. The world is thus left for China to take over. This brings me to the questions raised previously. Do China's technological advances and its economic might empower its desire and capacity to change the liberal world order and turn trade from a positive-sum game to a zero-sum game? More imperatively, does China wish to become a global hegemon? The answer to the first question is no. The reason is simple. China still needs the liberal world order to continue in order to reap its own economic harvest. A positive-sum game suits its needs well, and a zero-sum game does not. The answer to the second question is yes and no. Does China wish to become a global hegemon? Yes, it does wish, but will not become as such. To compromise this dichotomy, China will eye at the global throne with an exceptional Chinese characteristics. You might have heard that Chinese characteristics, Xi's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for the new era. You will hear Xi's leadership at the global throne will also be with the Chinese characteristics in due time. The Chinese characteristics serves as two blades of a knife in the hands of the new global power, depending when the knife is used for offensive means and when it is used for defensive mechanism. China did not stay idling when the opportunities arrive. Starting from October of 2018, Xi Jinping emphasized in his report to the 19th Party Congress that China will work with other countries to foster a new type of international relations and to build a global community with a shared future. This is the aim of China's major country diplomacy in the new era. According to Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, quote, China traveled on a road of major country diplomacy that reflects China's distinct vision, style, and values, producing historical accomplishments our diplomatic efforts have been instrumental to upholding national sovereignty and interests, and to facilitating domestic reform and development. China will embrace the world with open arms and enormous market potential. All will be welcome to access and benefit from the new opportunities of China's development. In the new era, we will work even harder to see that China will enjoy a better environment for development and make greater contributions to human progress." Unquote. While Trump is alienating with his most valuable allies, Xi Jinping is personally involved in the planning and conduct of head of state diplomacy. Today, Xi has visited 57 countries in different parts of the world and received more than 110 foreign heads of state. Chinese compliments that Xi's head of state diplomacy goes, quote, "a long way towards deepening the world's understanding of China, enhancing China's profile and influence, and facilitating the solution of many global problems," end quote. The foreign minister praises that, quote, "we believe that President Xi's personal diplomacy will make a positive and responsible contribution to the well-being of his people, the interests of China, and the welfare of the world. It will write a whole new chapter of major country diplomacy with Chinese characteristics in the new era." What is China's U.S. policy in the new era then? I would like to take you to look at a few things that's seen by the Chinese following their selected actions. First, China thinks that the U.S. no longer promotes world open economy. Second, China is taking action in defense of economic openness, inclusive growth, and international collaboration. Third, China thinks that the Trump administration has answered the question that the U.S. does not support for the pillars of global governance. It believes that the U.S. is marginalizing or disrupting existing global institutions and international organizations and agreements, most of which were designed and promoted by the U.S. in the past 70 decades. Fourth, China starts to view global institutions not as instruments of American power. Instead, global governance is seen as restraints on the unrestrained exercise of the U.S. power. Fifth, China is interpreting Trump's deep skepticism or hostility towards major multilateral organizations. In other words, they are confirming that Trump prefers bilateral deal-making among great powers and dislikes regional and multilateral organizations that constrain the United States. Six, China thinks that the United States has unexploited bargaining power left on the table, and it has declined from past greatness. Seventh, China pays attention to the trend that there are nationalist and inward-looking political forces inside the United States, from the White House to local communities. Eighth, while U.S. is seen undermining the global institutions, China is taking advantages on the global agenda that has been set in recent years by internationally active corporations and international non-governmental organizations. Ninth, with the U.S. withdrawing from the global platforms, China has abandoned its long-standing policy of non-interference in favor of a more interventionist approach. 10th, China is preparing itself as to meet new challenges in the process of global negotiation and governance, both of which require opening to greater legislative and public scrutiny. Last, China believes that the U.S. will use all available tools to prevent China from undermining international competition. Here's the Chinese official view on the U.S. relations. As Colonel Owen suggests, I would like to use more of the information that I obtained from inside China, in their eyes, how they see the U.S.-China relations. According to the statement by the Chinese foreign minister, here's the quote: China and the U.S. are agreed that we share broad interests, we means China, and important responsibilities for global peace. Language sounds very different. Stability and prosperity. Our two countries are to carry out broad-based cooperation on the basis of mutual benefit, managing of our differences on the basis of mutual respect, deepen mutual understanding and friendship between our people, and work together to address major regional and global challenges. We ought to work for the sustained, healthy, and steady growth of our relations, end quote. Wang Yi emphasized that, quote, China is determined to stay on the path it has chosen, and China's development and revitalization is unstoppable, end quote. Regarding the specific criticism, China will replace America's role in the world. Wang Yi said, quote, this strategic conclusion is fundamentally wrong. China is on the path of socialism with distinctive Chinese characteristics. Its success is underpinned by its commitment to peaceful development and win-win cooperation. China's path is completely different from that of traditional powers, and as such is commended and welcomed by a growing number of countries. The truth is, the more China develops, the more contribution it can make to the world. One continues, quote, that end quote before one continues. One continues, quote, China is on a long march to modernization. It has no need or intention to displace America. China and America must respect each other, combine our strengths, and pursue win-win cooperation on the basis of the 3 joint communiques and our common understanding. China-U.S. relations have gone through a lot in the past few decades, but dialogue and cooperation has always carried the day. It is a wise thing to do. There can be no alternative. That's what the official statement. Here is my conclusion. I think, very importantly, the fact that China is not going to go away. Young generations, even including us, will continue to live with China almost at every place we go. So I try to project a mutually acceptable but challenging position, how to work with China, a factor that we cannot distance from ourselves. With the balance of power shifting and responsibility sharing on the shoulders of both Americans and Chinese, despite what the foreign minister says. That's quite new, because in the past, China often plays much less powerful position, but now it seems to be on an equal footing. So I accept that. So I said sharing the responsibilities on the shoulders of both Americans and Chinese. In the foreseeable future, a new strategy requires immediate attention as to engage and disengage, challenge and integrate in a positive way the implementation of a short-term engagement and disengagement or decoupling, a medium-term challenging a lot, but in a friendly way, and a long-term integrating, especially with China's respect to the liberal international order. That's the foundation and a starting point to integrate that country. Demands a flexible rather than a reactive US-China policy. Practical modifications to policy implementations in the US part should include: 1, acknowledging China's socialist system under one-party rule. 2nd, accommodating China's quest to be viewed as pursuing an interdependent foreign policy of peace as a developing country. And 3rd, acknowledging China's increasing contribution to global stability and prosperity. These policy adjustments circumvent the pitfall of appearing censorious to China, but nonetheless oblige China to behave in a manner that achieves the U.S. long-term strategic objectives. It is anticipated that internal demand in China will force social changes, resulting ultimately in domestic demand for political change. Without such change, China's economy will eventually suffer. Here is a point I'm going to explain later. The Xi's one-man rule does not seem to fit into this possibility that domestic request for change will occur. But that's the good point that we will start from there to take advantage the backward progress towards a one-man rule will eventually stir the society for more thirst of social changes. Without such change, the Chinese economy will eventually suffer. By endorsing a soft power deterrence strategy, I would like to say that China's own method and engagement style will be used as a means to curtail its growing geopolitical influence through BRI, questionable, and to restrain its anti-American alliance with Russia. And we can do that. Holding China accountable to its self-proclaimed principles and international norms serves the end of achieving U.S. strategic objectives to defend global interests across the spectrum of cooperation and competition and conflict through the coming decades. I sincerely studied in terms of the changes manifested through the Xi's leadership as a one-man rule, very similar to the Mao's era and Deng's era. But every time when Mao's era, Deng's era come to the political spectrum, the country suffers tremendously because when the party inserts more power through all different sectors, including those companies which are doing business for the BRI project throughout the world, especially Southeast Asia and Africa, the party literally will lose control of it. But the smart thing the Chinese leaders have been always making sure that they will not lose the party's grips of power, using that as a leverage to move the economy forward. As I mentioned briefly in my presentation before, the one-party rule has turned out to be successful. And it will be a fool thing to deny that fact. But how could we leverage that limited power inside China and then see it when it expands to the outside world and the possibility of failure can occur expectedly? So with that, I would like to perform the best part of it, that I'm good at Q&A, so I look forward to have good questions regarding, it's very embarrassing to read other than just to, like in class, to freely express your ideas in front of a great audience with great questions. Thank you very much.